Okay, welcome, Generation Movie on a Wednesday night, 10 o'clock. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
Appreciate all you do. My name is J.W. Colwell. I have nowhere else to go. and Rich Drees is DOR, my good friend from FILMBUFF Online. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm doing well. I mean, I literally just walked in from hanging out with some filmmakers here in Northeast PA, which was a great time. I spent a good part of the day writing a piece on what in the world is going on at Warner Brothers right now in regards to Batgirl.
Zaslav has spoken. He has spoken.
A terrible mistake, and he is running. I have a bad feeling about tomorrow's investors call quarterly report. We're going to hear more bad news tomorrow. Guaranteed.
Yeah, briefly in the story in it, because we're a movie show, we do deep dives, but this is the kind of news that would be on my show, Loud and Nerdy. We were talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. It's a debacle. Like, it's one of the worst decisions, not because you made a movie for $90 million and you decide you don't think it's good and you not want to release it. The hemming and hawing, the not telling folks exactly how they feel, and the artists. Who the hell is going to want to work with Warner Brothers and this guy running things? It's very reminiscent of Chapek, and it's also, like I was trying to explain on the show earlier that I have. It's a worse debacle than streaming all the movies because they backed up the Brinks truck to take care of that problem, and nobody was upset. Everybody was upset. They were upset, but the movies, Rich.
Nolan still went and took Oppenheimer to Universal. This is, I think, even worse because all this work by hundreds of people, screenwriters down to guys who built sets. Is not even going to go to streaming. It's going unseen. They're locking this thing away. And, the directors have to find out while they're in Morocco because one of them was getting married. How fucking evil is that? That they have to find it out on your wedding day.
It's also the weird shit that's been going on with not just Batgirl, but also the Scoob holiday haunts. The movies that disappeared on HBO Max overnight that are all HBO Max movies that they theoretically could get a tax break on. They all disappeared. Moonshot among them.
I would need to see the math on how taking a movie you've already created, you've already released, and then taking it back creates a tax break for you.
So we got a couple comments. First off, Ken McKernan. Good evening, friends. Good evening, Ken. Thank you. We consider you a friend too. We thank you for calling us friends. I like that. I resemble that remark. Joe's good evening, gentlemen. By the way, Rich is right about how you post about an officer and a gentleman. Okay, yeah, we're gonna get into it. We're gonna get into it. This is the first movie that we're not both happy with. So, it's a little bit angry, the movie. And then Joe wrote, I heard a rumor Discovery is pulling plug on HBO Max. No. But the rumors going around that tomorrow they'll announce that HBO Max and Discovery Plus are merging.
As
which would
the services themselves are going to merge.
right, which would be a theoretically charging more, theoretically not having the branding that they already have established with HBO Max. It's a debacle.
And they're going to cut back on original scripted programming because Zaslav, coming from Discovery, all he knows is unscripted stuff. You know, the guy who basically fucking gave us Honey Boo Boo is now running Warner Brothers and its vast, wonderful library of material and the vast, wonderful library of new things that are being created.
Yeah, it's
all
a
service is now in the hands of the guy who foisted Honey Boo Boo on us.
well, and also, so like I think before we start the show, one of the interesting things that came out was the first thing was the movie wasn't good, but that isn't necessarily true because there have been test screening announcements and people have seen it and they didn't hate it, right? Second thing that came out was that we only want DC to be big screen, big budget, which is also not true. And then the third thing finally comes out that I think it was either Hollywood Reporter or Variety called them on it. Hey, what about the taxes you're getting for just shelving these films? And then it got awfully quiet at Warner Brothers Discovery Plus today. So it's a mess.
What I wrote about earlier today, and you can see on filmbuffonline.com, plug.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, they've really burned some bridges already with last year's stunt to push everything to day and date with theatrical and streaming at the same time. And this burns a lot of people too. And a lot of other people are really taking a look at this. Hollywood, you have to remember, a lot of business is done based on relationships. I like this guy. I want to work with this person again, that kind of thing. And
I trust them with my material. I trust them with my movie that it will get seen by audiences. The statement from the directors, who, by the way, have worked and done well with Sony and worked and done well with Disney, it's a mess. And their statement is it's heartbreaking. Basically, we had made trust. We put a lot of work into this movie. It cost $90 million. We did everything we could, and we want it to be seen by audiences. And we're just not going to get that chance. And that's the worst thing for artists. And I think that with this mentality of these people running studios that don't realize the eggshells they're stepping on. Yeah. If you don't have artists to do your work, if you can't reboot DC, which is what you're theoretically thinking you're trying to do, if nobody wants to work with you. And the other thing is, one of the things that was going for Batgirl was that it was going to be like it had the Brendan Fraser comeback and the Michael Keaton comeback. And, people would have given it a lot of leeway.
Oh, yeah. You can't tell me you couldn't put this movie into theaters and have people show up just on the strength of Michael Keaton.
Michael Keaton. Yes. And also the other thing is, if
90 million opening weekend.
Where you're looking at real problems, though, right? Is that if Batgirl goes and she's a major character and she's been in the movie, they already spent $90 million. It's already done. What happens to Blue Beetle, which isn't as well known? What happens to, and this is the one I think a lot of people are concerned with because it's become HBO Max's flagship show. What the hell happens to Peacemaker?
Well,
because that's not a big budget movie type crowd.
Well, James Gunn has already been on Twitter tonight to say that Peacemaker season 2 is still a go. So, as far as he knows, at least.
Zaslav has spoken. He doesn't seem to know what he's doing, though.
And it's
I need the next season of Titans. Damn it! Titans is okay, but again, Peacemaker. I was actually looking forward to the Batgirl movie. I'm not gonna lie. Leslie Grace is a really good young actress. The director guys that worked on Miss Marvel and did a great job.
Yeah, and I just want to speak the idea that DC movies have to be spectacle, and with a $200 million budget is nonsense. I just refer you back to 2019 and a little movie that was made for about $50 to $70 million called Joker, and it cleared $1 billion at the box office worldwide. Now, I'm not saying
they made sure they announced that stuff today too. Like that was the other thing is it just seemed like bad form to cancel a $90 million movie and announce that you're releasing Joker on October 4th, 2024, when we know Joaquin Phoenix is making $20 million for that movie and Lady Gaga is going to have to be paid too. It's a bad form, man. Like, if you're saying you're trying to cut costs, that's fine.
Yeah,
But
it's absolute
bad
chaos
form.
going on right now there. You know, and like
So
I was saying,
we get some clappy hands. Oh, wait, that's actually, is that sign language? What is that? Hi, maybe
no,
hi?
a little bit of this. Ah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Thanks,
Libya,
Lib.
that stands for something. I unfortunately do not know as American Sign Language as well as I want to.
That's not sign language. It's just this.
It's just okay, like Rockstar.
Hans!
I got to meet Libby, and I got to meet Libby at David Madison's birthday show last week. So thank you for joining us tonight, Libby. And Tim Milliken, who's also going to be one of the hosts on the Indie Escape Network. Thank you. Hey dudes. Hey dude to yourself. But we have to get to where we're going. The Warner Brothers thing is going to be a mess in the next 3 days, and I've never seen a studio fall on itself like 3 times really fast, hard.
I'll probably have more coverage of this tomorrow as it's breaking and some more analysis. In the meantime, hopefully tomorrow, my partner at FilmBuff Online, William Gadavaskis, will have a great history of studio mismanagement at Warner's through all sorts of different executive
Fun
regimes.
Stuff.
Just not
there's a sex scandal with Fujiwara. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's been messy. You know what's not messy? If you like our content, if you like the Indie Escape Network YouTube channel, the Indie Escape Network, great place to find it. That's a great headline away from sex scandals too. Quality content, a bunch of good people doing good stuff. We're super happy about where we're at. We also have a Facebook page, Indie Escape Network on Facebook, because I'm the old. But Facebook.com/the Indie Escape. Super good times. And let's see, we got one more comment. Hi and rock on. Okay, thank you, Libby, for the translation because I'm old. Wait, she heard hi and rock on. Hi and rock on yourself. Trying to get you some extra views on Tubi for her movie Darkness Waits. Apparently, I didn't know this, but Tubi pays more than any other for any independent movies, Rich. So if you get your movie on Tubi, they actually, for every time it gets viewed, they get some sort of money, which is nice. So we're always pushing Tubi for folks. But Darkness Waits is one of her movies on Tubi. I just want to get it out there. She's really nice. But let's get to it, Rich, because I went back to this movie and we're going to talk about a movie tonight called An Officer and a Gentleman. 40 years old. I did not know in doing the research for this movie, this is not just big, Rich. Third for the year. So E.T., Tootsie, An Officer and a Gentleman. It's I'm amazed by that. I also don't know that it's aged well. In the rewatch this week, I don't know that it. Oh, you're welcome, Libby. I don't know that it's aged well. I look at it and I just go, it's messy. And I don't know how much Taylor Hackford likes women, and I don't know. Richard Gere is also cold. Like I know everybody, like people were in love with Richard Gere, American Gigolo, and everything in the early '80s, and a bunch of other movies. You know what I mean? I don't know how much Richard Gere. Like he's very cold. And like going through production stuff, I found that the most interesting thing for me, and I don't know what you came up with, but the interesting things for me was the sheer volume of fighting on this set is the main gist of like once people got roles, right? You know, you start with basic casting. They start filming. Let's see, they film on location in Washington State, basically at an old retired Army fort, Fort Worden, I think, in the Pacific Northwest. And they start acquiring the cast. and everything. But this cast doesn't get along, Rich. Nobody gets along with anybody on this cast. Gere and Winger have incredible chemistry on screen, but the moment the cameras stop, they don't talk to each other. Gere and Gossett fighting for screen time, but also Gossett thinks Gere's a punk, and Gere doesn't think Gossett's put enough into the role.
Well, I think the answer to that question is who got the Academy Award nomination out of those two? It was Gossett.
Well, that's well, and Winger too. Winger's in the hunt for things. But so they start filming. They have basic casting. Casting stuff is really interesting. Like, original cast was supposed to be John Denver, and then the usual gang of suspects that was around in the early '80s: Jeff Bridges, Christopher Reeve, Harry Hamlin, John Travolta. And interesting, side note that you come up with when you're doing research. John Travolta also had American Gigolo and turned down American Gigolo at the last minute. And then John Travolta had this role and then turned this down. And you wonder why Travolta's career doesn't get revived till 94, right? It's because he's turning down all these roles that Richard Gere stomps in and steals. So thank God for John Travolta.
True. I'm just kind of wondering, like, what was he up to then at this time? Let me pull this up here real quick. Oh, could you be any slower today, IMDb?
No, it's the world's in crisis. We canceled Batgirl. Everything's going haywire, my friend.
Yeah.
Travolta turns this role down, so they cast him. It's a second Gere hit that basically stole right out from under Travolta. The casting for Paula, who ended up being played by Debra Winger, the people involved here are super interesting, and I will say that this is going to be an interesting transition because at some point the person that we're going to talk about, but Sigourney Weaver, Angelica Houston, and Jennifer Jason Leigh, who basically right up the filming has the role, and then gets offered a role in Amy Heckerling's Fast Times at Ridgemont High. That's what we call a tease. Just I'm going to say why it's a tease, but it's a tease. Jennifer Jason Leigh, who had a role in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, basically backs out at the last minute. Debra Winger gets the role.
Taking a look real quick at Travolta's filmography here. He did Urban Cowboy in 1980, which was a good hit for him.
With Debra Winger, who we fought with.
In 81, another good film. And then skipped out on this and on Officer and a Gentleman. And Travolta's next film was the following year, 1983. Staying Alive, yeah. Which I remember being in a theater when that trailer came on. So I was like 13. I can't remember what I was seeing, but I remember that trailer coming on and people laughing at it.
Hysterical. But like I said, it's weird.
Saturday Night Fever sequel.
Yeah, it's not a good movie. But I could see him going back to the well. But you got to figure he feels he's snake bit because he passes on two of the biggest, he's got to figure he's got bad luck.
Yeah. Bad luck or just bad advice from somebody in his management.
Now, another interesting side note that you never hear about that you don't think you're going to find. So Louis Gossett Jr. plays the tough talking drill sergeant, Emil Foley, right? It was originally supposed to be Arlie Ermy. And Arlie Ermy actually trained him on being a drill sergeant for the film. And of course, Arlie Ermy would eventually get his chance to scream at people because he would eventually become, he would take the drill sergeant role in Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. So it's really interesting that Ermy had the role, but then he went to the side and basically had to get out of the way. And basically they cast Louis Gossett Jr. And Louis Gossett Jr. takes the role and he runs with it. It's probably the best role in the film, aside from Paula, right? Um, Gossett is really he's mesmerizing. He's terrifying. Like there's nothing about him that's nice. It's a traditional drill sergeant role, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
the really theoretically heart of gold, but you never get that veneer until the last 10 minutes of the movie, right? You don't
Yeah.
get him any even cracking a smile or even like being nice in any conceivable way.
No.
And it's a real interesting cast that has years of experience. Winger's right on the cusp. He's already done Urban Cowboy. Gere's done American Gigolo. So we're right at the cusp of their sweet spot, their spectacular time. Because Winger's going to have a great 80, like she's early 80s, right? Until about 86, 87, right? She's going to have a bunch of roles and just kind of dominate. So they get her early, but I was intrigued by the casting. Like Sigourney Weaver would have been interesting, but again, I don't know that it works. Jennifer Jason Leigh is a fantastic actress, and I think she skews way too young for the role.
Yeah. I was gonna
And
say
then
for me that's
way
way
too
too.
young, way too young. And then the other two were Rebecca De Mornay and Meg Ryan and Gina Davis, all auditioned for the role. So they're all
Mm.
in that weird wheelhouse. Gina Davis, of course, is coming off Tootsie, and doing what it's so they had a strong group of actresses and actors trying to get the role. Um, so I think it's interesting that they get everything going. And one of the things during production is they separated Gossett. Everybody else got to hang out except for Gossett. Gossett was completely stowed away from the cast. And when they were filming, he basically was allowed to be on set, and then he basically had to, um, he would leave the set and he wouldn't be allowed to spend any time with anybody else. And I just think it's one of those interesting things where you look up and you go, well, that might have improved his acting. It might have improved, how the reactions to him, because they
Mm-hmm.
didn't have any kind of thing. Ken writes, I seen the movie once. I was about 14. It was on VHS. Older sister and mom wanted to see it. Not something a 14-year-old boy wants to watch. Yeah, but there is nudity. A lot of nudity and there's karate. So I don't. It depends on what you're watching. It is not. It's 2 hours and 4 minutes. It does play slow though. Like it plays like an old timey romantic movie. Um, where did you?
Yeah.
Where did Now, evening, Tara. Hi, Terry. How we doing? Terry's a filmmaker as well. Rich, Terry, Rich.
Howdy.
But what I was going to say, Rich, where did you find you had problems? I had problems with some things. Uh, it's it's got a weird edge towards the women in the film. The women in town in the film. It's
Yeah.
got a
I don't think. Okay. It's one thing for your characters not to like or respect women. That's fine. That yeah, depiction is not necessarily endorsement. However, I think this movie, I think the movie itself doesn't like or respect women, or sees them outside of vessels for men, and that's it. We have four female characters that you could say were like main and supporting, who have more than like a line of a bartender, or somebody like okay, there's in the cast listing, there's like prostitute number one, prostitute number two. We're not talking about those characters. We're talking about the four main female characters.
Paula,
Okay.
Lynette, Seeger.
Mm-hmm.
And are you going mom? Is that where you're?
And Paula's mom, yeah.
And Paula's mom. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a weird. Yeah, go ahead.
Of those four, well, let's start with Seeger on her own. I like the idea that she's there in officer training school, which is really tough no matter who you are. And I don't like the idea, though, that after 7 weeks of intense physical training, she still can't get over the wall. And then right at the end, 11 weeks, she still can't get over the wall. 11 weeks of intense physical training. Like, it just,
It's
and she falls down and she cries because she's a woman. And
well,
I was like, come on, guys, really? She would have. I think
well,
in
and it's
that
also he gives up the record for it's like a subtle like guys have to give up their records so that they can help women achieve anything in the military kind of thing, which is wild. You know,
which is
and
kind of
it's
misogynistic
messy.
too. It's gross. Is what it is. And and yeah, he gives up the record. And I could see if they had tried to do that as like he's learning more about not just looking out for himself, but looking out for his fellow
For his teammates,
candidates, his teammates. Yeah, and he's learning a lesson here.
it's
I
never really
don't get
established.
I don't. Yeah, I don't. Nothing else around that scene.
Well, even in it has like it's really interesting that Gere, and we'll talk about this in Legacy, but Gere has the Cinderella thing going on in this movie, and they're like he's rescuing the poor middle class female from obscurity, right? There's a
From her
whole
life
weird like, and Gere will do that again. So we'll talk a little bit about Legacy later. In his later films, there's a little movie with a prostitute and $3,000 that we can discuss. But basically everything goes off without a hitch. That there's not a lot of stories or anything, except that Richard Gere hates Louis Gossett Jr. Like you can Google, you can go home tonight, you can look online, you can get in your camera, and you can actually see Gere Gossett feud. Because I guess during the fight scene, there's a one point where Richard Gere was amped up and he was taking it very seriously, and he hit Lou Gossett, and Lou Gossett's like, I'm here for the shit. I'm here to act. And Richard Gere passes it off in interviews like, I was well trained, and Lou Gossett didn't take the training seriously. So I don't know about you, but if I'm in a scene with somebody and they hit me and it's like it's not pulled, and that's not about my training, that's about you being a douchebag. And then the reason I bring it up is because there's also a whole thing with Richard Gere and Debra Winger where they don't talk off screen. They don't they finish their scenes, and the scenes are electric, but there's a very animal quality of the scenes that's not necessarily perfect, like the way it's shot, the way it's edited, and even during the editing they can't decide on the ending, and the movie is most well known for the ending. It's one of the most well known endings because most people who want that dream, they get the dream they want. But Gere wasn't on board with it, and Taylor Hackford wasn't on board with it until they saw it. And I found it really interesting that when you look up information on it, the screenwriter takes umbrage with anybody saying it's a Cinderella story, because one of the things he says, and it's a quote he gave to, I think, the Variety or whatever, where basically he said, actually it's in his own book, it's called Writing Screenplays That Sell. I don't believe that those who criticize the Cinderella style ending were paying very close attention to who exactly is rescuing whom. And I don't know that you get that. Like, I understand what he's saying, that the Zach Mayo character is kind of douchey and not spectacular, and the person that's actually the good person in the movie is Paula. She always is. She's the salt of the earth character that kind of jumps around and basically hitches her wagon to somebody that's kind of abusive, kind of on the edge, has really bad parenting at home, and a mother that has committed suicide. That's the other thing. Suicide in this movie is taken very lightly. Not lightly, but just kind of like it's used as character stuff and used as plot devices that, they're kind of uncomfortable now.
Yeah, I'll definitely give you that. Now, at one point in the movie, they're at that dance, cotillion, whatever you want to call it, and we see David Keith's character with his wife, and they're slow dancing. They're very much in love. They're an actual, real, mature couple, and they look. Richard Gere's character turns to his buddy and goes, "Look at them, 5 years and they're still in love. Isn't that great?" Where do you think Richard Gere's character is with Paula 5 years after this movie ends?
I don't know. I don't know if they make it. I think the dream and the hope is that they do. Joe
I
types
don't
in.
think they do at all.
Not sure if they can get away with loose conversation with the guy from Firestarter. Steers and yeah, there's definitely dialogue in the film. The screenplay is very the
Of its time.
elements. Yeah, and the elements with regards to the randomized torture of characters in this film is also kind of fun and just like off the chart, like just off the charts ridiculous.
Mhm.
But what I would say is that Lou Gossett, the instruction from Arlie Ermey, he also had an instruction from another gunnery sergeant who's an actual drill instructor at one of the aviation schools in Pensacola. He's actually in the movie and he was super well trained. And the other thing we have to talk about production, they come up with a score. The score is by, I think it's Joe Nishi. Music by Jack Nishi. Sorry, I don't know why I said Joe. But he comes up with a bass score, and from that score, they create a song, and this is part of the production. They take a bass score, turn it into a song. They give it over to somebody, and the song becomes gangbusters. It becomes an '80s ballad. They're still playing. Created by Buffy St. Marie and Will Jennings. Song's called "Up Where We Belong." It is a barn burner of a song, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's an absolute barn burner of a song. And I think it's one of the first movies that we've actually watched on our program or discussed on our program that the song powers the movie. Like, do you know, like you look at movies and sometimes you get them like Titanic or I'm trying to think of other movies like Axel's theme from Beverly Hills Cop, or there is music that gets incorporated into a movie that all of a sudden makes it super easy for the movie to get over. And this
there's
song,
one strong musical melodic theme that is constantly repeated.
and it just
sometimes in minor keys, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, and that's very
in all
much
facets of the movie. It's all over the place. It's everywhere in the movie. It is a consistent through line. It is one of the only consistent through lines because you don't get necessarily a consistent through line from Gere's performance. You get it from Gossip, but he isn't on screen as much. You get it from Winger. She's got most of the screen time too. But Gere isn't consistent. Gere changes volumes and changes. The whole production is. I don't know how they necessarily got it over to him, but basically it's an incredible thing where you look at it and you go, once they tie this song to this movie, it becomes. And Rich, and this is something where you and I were discussing before the show. I didn't know. I knew it was big. Like I was thinking to myself, like 80 million, right? 90, like somewhere. But Rich, off a budget of $6 million, 6 to 7, depending on who you talk to. This movie grosses $190 million in the summer of '82.
It's not too shabby.
It's
especially
ridiculous.
in the summer of 1982.
Right. It sells 44 million tickets, Rich, in the U.S. and Canada alone. It ends up grossing another 60 million worldwide. It ends with 190 million, which if you look at the number breakdown from 82 to now, that's like a 700, $800 million movie.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's gangbusters from the go. It opens at 3 million and it just plays forever. Plays all summer. It finishes the year the highest grossing film of 1982, the third highest grossing film after E.T. and Tootsie, which to me, if you had told me yesterday that I'd be looking at a list that said E.T., Tootsie, An Officer and a Gentleman, I would have laughed at you. I would have laughed. But it's so big, and it's incredible. It's incredible, Rich. And it only grossed $3 million in its opening weekend. That means it played forever. It's like the ET thing we did a couple weeks ago, where it played for a year. You know what I mean? Like $3 million is not a lot of money.
No, it's definitely, part of the cultural zeitgeist of 1982, and it reverberates today. People know. I think people know the movie more than have actually seen the movie at this point.
I think it's one of those effects, Mandela effects. I think they remember the song and they remember the ending, but they don't necessarily remember the fake pregnancy or the suicide in the middle of the movie, or his mom's suicide, or the drunken father at the beginning that's super abusive, or how abusive Gossett is.
The drunken father who shares prostitutes with his son at the beginning of this movie.
Yeah, they don't. I don't think they remember that. I think they remember a really nice sequence where cut to the song, and just the song playing in the background before it hits the crescendo when he picks her up and carries her out of her paper factory existence. It's an incredible, like you look at it and you go, and then the numbers are astounding.
Yeah,
like it's incredible, Rich. $190 million
into the 21st century that in 2012 they tried to make a musical out of this.
That musical is actually, not only did the musical not do well in 2012, but it is being revived for 2022, and it is traveling. Also, and this is a connection to the show, both the University of Scranton and myself. Brendan Deneen is a book editor, and I believe he has hired I hope it's him. I hope it's the right Brendan Deneen. I believe he's acquired the rights to the book sequel to An Officer and a Gentleman.
I did not know there was a book sequel to it.
Yeah, there's a book sequel coming out in 2022, and it's An Officer's Daughter, I believe is what it's called. And so you have this whole we'll get into legacy, because like the idea that there's a musical makes me laugh wholeheartedly. I laugh hysterically because I don't know where you do other music with how the song is drilled into you. Like if you go to see An Officer and a Gentleman, a musical, I'm expecting to hear that theme the entire time, and whatever music is based from the musical better have that theme in it running through it. Like I don't know how you fix it. But I believe my friend Brendan Deneen just purchased the sequel book, which I think is interesting. I have a question out to him, but he hasn't gotten back to me today. I think he's on vacation. So yeah, the book sequel is called An Officer's Daughter. It just got picked up for publishing. And I'm amazed at that. And I'm also amazed that we waited this long, for a sequel, for a book option on a sequel for a movie that is 40 years old. But the box office is stellar. It ends up doing very well on home video. It has several versions of the film. There's also 2 versions of the film that exist in the world. There's an uncensored R-rated cut, and they did a whole different version for broadcast television, which first aired on NBC. So they basically, their whole set, they cut some sex scenes, get rid of the nudity, they get rid of the suicide nudity, they get rid of the cursing, obviously. But it's definitely a warm feeling with regards to the box office. Now,
it was obvious that you had to do those little trims. Outside of the cursing and that brief bit of nudity, I can't, that seemed like a fairly easy movie to get onto TV, unless you have to trim it down to fit into a 2-hour time frame.
Yeah, and it's only 4 minutes, and then you probably have to cut about 20 minutes to get it to fit.
And that feels like those cuts would hurt the overall story.
Now, the next thing that comes up, box office is stellar, way bigger than I thought it was. Like, I can't believe it's third. And the two movies that are ahead of it, I think are head and shoulders better movies. Like they're like Tootsie might be, and I'm going to say this to you before I know we're definitely going to get to it in the course of the show and the end of this 1982 40-year reunion. I know it'll be on my list to one of the movies we have to do. I say to you that I think Tootsie might be the greatest American comedy ever made. And you would have other movies that you would think of, but I'm going to make that argument when we get to
You
that.
say this on the absolute anniversary of the release of the Marx Brothers, The Coconuts.
I can, yes, I can. I'll do it. You know what? You can put. I consider Marx Brothers separate. I don't like. If you'd said to me something like It Hot or something like that, where you get no fight about something, we can. But Tootsie is one of my absolute favorite movies. So I can't believe it's. I can't believe it's just below. Like it's just above An Officer and a Gentleman. We do box office and we do critical choice, right? Critical response then and now. I think you're right. I think one of the things that's coming up with regard to this movie is I don't know that anybody's seen it recently. I think it's one of those movies that is not as beloved and is not as like I think people remember it differently than what actually occurs in the film. But the aggregate scores are high, right? If you look at Rotten Tomatoes, aggregates are super high, not super duper high, but high enough where you go, okay. Hold on, I'm getting it up right.
You think the reason that people aren't still talking about this or still going back to it, I mean, there's a number of reasons why it could be. You know, is it because people recognize that it's kind of misogynistic and crappy on that level? Probably not, because you have to watch the actual thing to think.
No, and I think that's something. I think that's something you and I look at, and I think people who like have to actually put, like, I think people. We did a poll last week of horny movies. I don't know why it came up, but it was horny movies. These are movies that you know you can rewatch them now, and you can never watch. Like they'll never get made again. Porky's will never be made again. Revenge of the Nerds will never be made again.
Good.
The way that they were made, right?
Yeah.
You know, so it's this weird thing, and I think that's part of the Officer and a Gentleman thing. So it's at a 78% Rotten Tomato. So it's fresh, and it's at an 81% audience score, which is kind of low for a movie that you would consider would be beloved. But the critic stuff is really interesting. Roger Ebert loved this movie. Like, not just liked. Roger Ebert loved this movie. 4 stars loved. 4 stars loved it a lot. Like, some of the gist from it, and this was from 2004. An Officer and a Gentleman is the best movie about love that I've seen in a long time. Maybe that's because it's not about love as a Hollywood concept, but about love as growth, as learning to accept other people for who and what they are. I think that's beautiful. I don't know that that's the movie you're watching. Like, the growth, there's not a lot. Maybe there's growth because he helps the girl with that wall, I guess. But I was thinking, like, I think the interesting thing about the movie is it's billed as this romantic drama, this wonderful romantic drama, and it's really just about poor people. It's really about the middle class working stiffs trying to hitch their ride to something bigger and better, and not necessarily knowing a way out of their existence. The paper factory is the worst thing that could happen to you in this movie.
Yeah, and that's my complaint about how they deal with the other 3 characters is that, you know, they're just looking for that way out. And they just want to get married to a guy who is a pilot, not a guy who is a nice guy that they fall in love with who has to be a pilot. It has to be a pilot.
I had forgotten about that trauma in the middle of the movie. I had forgotten about the trauma. Like, I had forgotten about the dinner sequence. There's a dinner sequence in the middle of this movie where Zach meets her family, and it's kind of an ambush because Zach's not expecting to go in and have dinner with her family, but he's brought in, he's sat down, he has a full meal with the family, and it doesn't go great. Basically, because the father is looking at her, and then he goes outside and he gets bombarded by Debra Winger going, "Oh, by the way, that's not my real dad. Oh, by the way, my dad was a former pilot." So now all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, everything she's said or done in the movie at this point is in question because her dad was a pilot that left her mom, and all she wants to do is get out. So it
Yeah.
becomes this weird, like it's a weird sequence, and it ends weird, and it's wild. Because he kind of just like goes, "Oh, okay, that's cool," and he just drives away. And so,
Mhm.
like, I think the interesting thing, in when you're looking at it now, I think it's one of those movies that lives solely on its reputation. It's got a reputation as being this wonderfully romantic, kind of sexy, kind of like, like the chemistry, incredible chemistry. Person. It's got a military vibe to it. A few years well before Top Gun, right?
Mhm.
It has
I,
they do the traditions of the military pretty well in the film,
yeah.
right?
I mean,
This
over the course of the 80s, we're going to see a lot of films about military training. Top Gun, Platoon, and a couple of the Platoon ripoffs that come
Full
later
Metal
on in the
Jacket,
second Full Metal Jacket, Hamburger Hill, those type of movies.
Hamburger Hill
And
is
I think this is one
incredibly
of the best
underrated. Good job. Hamburger Hill is incredibly underrated. One of the best Vietnam War movies ever made. Doesn't get enough credit. Great job. I love you. That's why we do a show together.
ones.
Go ahead, move on.
But I think this film right here does a really good job showing
How difficult.
the hardship and the difficulties of going through boot camp. I think it does it very well, and I think it kind of set the standard that those movies that would come later on down the road for the decade, that was the standard they had to reach.
I think it's
That was
also
their
interesting.
time.
You're right about that. I think that's totally true. There is
Mm.
a quality to the training sequences that are almost montage-ish. Like they're close to montages, but they're not. And what I would also say, I think it's one of the first movies that deals with the real consequences of flaming out of the military or not. The idea that the amount of pressure we put on these people, like there are very few suicides in military people into a certain point, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's one of the ways you can go back and revisit this movie now is how earnest it is at times about suicide. It's used as a plot device, but the
Mm-hmm.
emotion he feels after Sid passes away and the anger he has towards the girl that faked the pregnancy and all those things that are part of the melodrama of the film is interesting and unique to the time period. Like you didn't see a lot of young able-bodied men breaking apart, falling out of the service, and having a woman crush them and hanging themselves in their shower. So I think it's ahead of its time, and that's one of the few places where you could tie it into now, right? Now we know how many servicemen are going through the struggles. Now we
Mm-hmm.
know, like, it's one of the very few places where it's ahead of its time. Everything else, kind of a rollback, but that portion is ahead of its time.
Well, I think where currently where we're seeing a lot of unfortunate self harm amongst veterans is just stems from trauma from being in combat. Here, we're seeing what is sort of understandable, kind of what the whole drill sergeant training period is supposed to be, is breaking down them as individuals and then reassembling them into
Into officers. Yeah.
into officers and soldiers. And officers and soldiers have to have certain qualities that maybe aren't really good if you're just a normal person. And you
And
have
Sid
to be
falls
able to
victim to that.
you have to be able to look at another human being and go, I need to kill that person for my country, or that kill or be killed attitude. You can't have a moral qualm about it. And you also have to be able to, again, those ideas of teamwork and relying on the other people in your squad, things like that. um, I know I would never respond well to being in the military. I'd be like, fuck it, I'm sleeping in, to somebody yelling in my face
I
immediately would
feel
get
like
the
I feel like as film critics and who we are as radical nonconformists would be a real problem. I think
God, yeah.
both of us kind of we swim
Mhm.
to our own beat, and it's like I don't know if I can copy everything.
And so when we have that character commit suicide later, late in the film, it's because they were kind of been broken down because that's what they thought was expected of them by their family. Kind of
Expectations, yeah, the
built
expectations break them.
into something that they aren't. The person who they were in love with rejects them because they aren't the pilot. Again, this is where just women are just like looking to get their hooks into you, and which is a gross characterization. And
Yeah,
so
there's nothing
he doesn't
pleasant about that sequence. Very
he
rarely.
doesn't know who he is anymore. He doesn't know what his purpose is. The only thing that was giving him hope to go on, the only reason he had to live, rejected him flatly because he wasn't what
And
you know
isn't he isn't getting a child either.
with the title and the idea, and then so he goes and kills himself.
Yeah,
And
it's the sequence with her is before the suicide is a chilling. You feel that the movie could be viewed as misogynistic now, and I agree with you because that like very rarely in 80s films do you get the C bomb dropped. He calls her a cunt
oh
right to her face and just like
yeah,
and she looks devastated, but also like, and then she asks Debra Winger for help, and Debra Winger's like, "No, I'm sorry, I got my pilot. I don't know." Like,
yeah, and honestly, I kind of don't blame.
she's a,
It's the
it's a
new
very evil, it's an
where bitch
evil
used
kind
to
of
be the
melodramatic
nuclear
character.
yeah, where a bitch used to be the nuclear option, the C word now is, and even that's starting to erode away somewhat. I feel over the
But
last 5 to 10 years, and I kind of was on his side when he called her that because she
yeah, there's really
basically
nothing.
demanded suicide
Yeah, there's nothing great about
with
her.
her indifference.
We should talk a little bit about the legacy. It did have it had a good night at the Oscars. Well, it didn't have a great night at the Oscars, but it nominated for 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Best actress, best supporting actor, best screenplay, best film editing, best original score, and best original song. It of course
Mhm.
wins for Louis Gossett Jr. and Up Where We Belong both win. And it's his acceptance speech is fantastic. And then I also looked at today. So he wins Best Supporting Actor, and the category, Rich, was fucking stacked.
Who was
I
it?
don't throw. Okay, so nominees that year were Charles Durning in The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
John Lithgow in The World According to Garp,
Oof.
James Mason in The Verdict, Mason's
Yeah.
last role in The Verdict, playing a smarmy lawyer, fantastic, opposite Paul Newman. Um, so I got that. Louis Gossett Jr., right? One who wins.
Yeah.
And Robert Preston in Victor Victoria.
Wow.
Yes. It's one of
Okay.
the it's one of the best, like it's a heavy hitter. Like it is a heavy packed category of amazing character actors, and Louis Gossett Jr. wins. It's a good win. The only one I would say deserved more, like Robert Preston in Victor Victoria is one of the greatest things you'll ever see in your life. It's one of the great comedic, musically inclined performances ever. Like that movie is highly underrated. Um, and it was a year like '82. Think about it, Victor Victoria and Tootsie in the same year, and Garp. So you talk about
And
a year that had its finger on 2022's pulse, right?
mm-hmm.
With transgender and all these different things. Amazing the stuff
Yes.
that went in that year.
And what did Oscar winner Lou Gossett Jr. do after he finished Officer and a Gentleman?
I I, I want to
He
say
went.
Iron Eagle's coming up.
He went on to star in The Powers of Matthew Starr on NBC.
Well worth everybody's time, I guess. I don't. I,
No.
but yeah, I mean,
Even as a kid, I was like, "This show is crap," and I will watch anything with even the biggest whiff of science fiction about it, and it was
uh,
not good.
Ken brings this up. It's not a movie I've ever heard of someone say it's their favorite and can watch it over and over again.
Oh, definitely.
It's borderline unpleasant. I think, and again, I think the reputation factor is what keeps it going. And I do think, like, even the critical response, like, you know, Roger Ebert talking about it as a film about love, and I'm like, not in 2022 it ain't. But that brings us to the last portion. What
But-
kind of legacy does this movie have, Rich?
Well, I will say, you know, Roger Ebert changed his mind on a lot of things over time. And
Maybe he did.
That's why I say, you know, people should go out and watch it, even though we're kind of trashing it a little bit here.
It's still a very good. It's a well-made movie.
It's a well-made movie. The Lou Gossett Jr.
And Debra Winger are great. Debra Winger is really good too. Debra Winger in almost everything she's in, understated. She's not the biggest glow in the movie. I was reading one of the things we were talking about production and everything. She had a huge fight with Taylor Hackford because Taylor Hackford said she looked fat, and he gave her water pills at some point.
See, out of his mind.
Yeah, it was bad. Said she didn't look good, and I was like thinking to myself, watching the movie, going, "No, that's not no." She looked very good in the movie. So the viability of a franchise. I can't believe we're getting a book, Rich.
I'm interested to find out what that book is about. I might not read it, but I'm at least interested in the fact that it's out there.
Well, and I think the legacy also ties to what Ken was saying. Is there a single person that you go, that's my favorite movie of all time?
No.
And I just don't think that that's the case.
There's not a whole lot of people out there who will say that. But I would say, though, this movie is worth watching at least once, because of its place in Oscar history and because I think its attitudes about men and women, relationships and things like that have changed so much since this movie came out. I think it's interesting to watch and get an idea of this is what the mindset of some portion of the country was during the early 80s.
It's still there.
Some of it is still there, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, in other way, and God knows I could probably, if I wanted to be shitty about things, mention a couple of girlfriends who are probably more interested in, me as a provider rather than me as a partner in a relationship. And
sure.
And I'm sure there are women who have had that same problem too with people that they've dated. We've all had that issue.
Joe with the dagger. I'd rather watch Jaws 3D than Officer and Gentleman. I disagree. Jaws 3D is really bad. Jaws 3D is putrid, and I love the Jaws franchise, but it's putrid. This is a good movie. It's just it doesn't like.
It has some outdated concepts.
It has a lot of outdated concepts, and I also think the legacy comes from the reputation. I think the legacy comes from people remembering the music swell and the crescendo when he goes in and grabs her out of the paper factory and she's playing with his hat and her hat falls off and her hair is all luscious and great. She hugs her mom on the way out and all the women in the factory are like, "Oh, thank God she's escaping." And I think you remember how great it felt.
Her best friend goes, "You did it. You're escaping. You hooked your mitts into a guy who's going to haul you out of here. You did it." Literally, she says, "You did it." And it's like, ugh.
Well, yeah, there's definitely misguided stuff there. I think
it was one of those moments where I just said, "Fuck you, movie." I'm sitting on my couch and I just go, "Fuck you, movie," because you don't like women.
Because you already don't like the character. She's already a terrible character, and you don't want her siding with Paula in any way, shape, or form. Paula doesn't talk to her from the end of the movie. Like from the moment she fakes the pregnancy and the pregnancy thing ends, and then Sid kills himself, she doesn't talk to her. She doesn't appear to talk to her in any way. And then she's like at the end going, "Bully, good job, Paula.
Like they're
Go
friends.
get him." Like fuck.
Yeah, like friends. It's
now franchise viability. I up until yesterday when I found out that there was a musical that's going to be touring the country. 2022 is the year of An Officer and a Gentleman, the musical, and then also found out this week that they're producing a book sequel called An Officer's Daughter. I would say there's no franchise viability. But if you said to me that we're going to do a movie where they follow their marriage and what happened and the kids that were producing this marriage, I wouldn't be shocked, because we're looking for IP. We're looking for ripe IP and nostalgia, just the right amount of nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the Debra Winger character would have died of something. Like I feel it'll just be Gere, kind of menacing and sad that his wife has passed away.
Motorcycle accident and they both weren't wearing helmets.
Oh, that's mean. That's so funny, but true. That's how they went. Well, they weren't wearing helmets, and she wasn't wearing her helmet, and that's and then the daughter's basically coming home for the funeral. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what the book's gonna be about. I can't even fathom it.
I think it would be interesting though that if this book, comes out and gets people interested in the source material again. The musical comes around, people go see the musical, and they're like, wait a minute, I don't even remember this movie. They go back and start watching this movie again. I would be interested to see, if our opinions about it, are echoed among other people, or are there other more modern viewpoints of looking at this material that we may have missed. I'm anxious to see if this starts to generate a conversation again. I think
that'd be interesting too. But I also think you would get a certain portion of people our age and older that would just go, you're being too hard on it. You're being too hard on it. It's a romantic drama. They took things very seriously. It has very real seeming relationships, right? Because there is gravitas to the relationships, right?
Yep.
It takes boilerplate, lust in a bar, and then it kind of like there's a gradual progression of like, making eggs and realizing you're going to try to spend the rest of your life with somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we might get grilled on the fact that we're being too hard on it, but I will say, I think there's moments that are so mean spirited, and that they're so like just okay, and it just doesn't jibe with how we view things right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Like I'm curious what the book's gonna be about. I have a feeler out to my friend Brendan, who's apparently just acquired this book for his company. So I'm curious I'm totally curious. And basically I said, we're doing a deep dive in Officer and a Gentleman tonight. Did you acquire a book sequel this week? And it was because there's in the publishing thing, book options. You know what I mean? And it's just a real interesting little side note.
Yeah, I'd love to know more about that, actually, honestly.
Oh my God, fascinating. Absolutely fascinating that would be something that's viable. You know what I mean? So let's talk about a little bit about the network, in the Escape Network. We got Brandon Brooks' show coming up on Friday. I don't know who his guest is on IOU, but he usually has a great guest, usually a good deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
Has a really nice, reflective, fun chat with whoever he's chatting with, usually somebody in the film industry. I can't recommend Brandon's show on IOU anymore, although it might be the same person or somebody similar. But Brendan's show is great on Friday nights on the Indie Escape Network. Rich, where can people find you and your fine work, especially if they want information about, say, I don't know, a DC movie getting canceled and stricken from existence, like it's wiped clean by the wrath of God, or should say the wrath of Zaslav?
Well, all of my writing is found at filmbuffonline.com. Let's see. In addition to the aforementioned analysis of what's going on right now, at least up until this afternoon, at Warner Brothers regarding the cancellation of Batgirl, what that means for HBO Max, and what it means for Warner Brothers trying to work with talent in the future, and how they probably won't want to. It's a nice read, I think. I like it. I wrote it. Also, there is my...
and you're modest, too.
Well, try to be. But yeah, my modesty sometimes comes into conflict with my need to be self-promoting. It's always weird. I also have a brand new review up of Bullet Train, the new Brad Pitt action comedy, which opens in theaters tomorrow evening, or more accurately, Friday. And also able to be found on Twitter at FilmBuffRich. where I am usually just being a gadfly about progressive politics
A
and
great minute.
television and comics.
Okay, so a couple things, couple additions.
Oh,
Some good
yes.
questions to end night. Ken writes, this was a date night movie. Women want to see Richard Gere on the big screen. He was like the hottest guy at the time. I agree with that.
True.
I would say that, but he's not a great, like, he's not a nice guy. Like, I mean, he may be the sexiest thing going, and he knows karate and all this other stuff. But I agree. I agree with that, Ken. Kenny's like, Ken asked this question: if Travolta had done this, if this had Travolta, would it have done as well? I don't know.
Um, I think it would.
I
I think there would
I
be
don't
the
think he's edgy
same.
enough. I think
I
he's
think
too. I think he's too sanded. He's too sanded for this role. Like Gere was doing American Gigolo and all kinds of wacky shit. Travolta's doing Urban Cowboy, doing Staying Alive. Gere had an edge to him. And,
Hmm.
you know, we're talking about legacy. We didn't hit this
Yeah,
for a second. He goes on to do other Cinderella movies. He picks a prostitute out of nothing. Like with the legacy with Gere, Gere has become one of the romantic comedy people and one of
hmm
the hottest stars in Hollywood, right?
I
Um,
think I think
I don't.
Travolta would have had the same marquee draw. I think people would have been, oh, the new John Travolta movie called Officer and a Gentleman. Let's go see that. I think he would have had that same draw at the theater. I don't, but like I say, but like you say, excuse me, I agree with you that he's a little too sanded around the edges where Gere had a slightly
Dirty.
rough.
He has a dirty. He has a
Uh,
dirty vibe, Rich. Like I
yeah,
can say it.
he's a little more
I'm okay enough with my
dangerous.
sexuality. He has a dirty vibe going on. He's a little bit
He's
grittier than Travolta is. Okay,
he has a dangerous vibe to him that women, I'm sure, were reacting to and responding to.
Amanda
But yeah,
Burst.
good
That's who it
question.
was. Brandon show on Friday. Amanda Burst of Married with Children and Fright Night
Oh,
will be on the
yeah.
show. So that's an
Uh,
amazing show on
she,
Brandon.
if I'm remembering correctly, she's been very politically active too over the years.
Yes, she
So
has.
that's yeah, definitely
A
worth a
great get.
tune in for that.
So you can. What were you going to say? You said you had a final thought.
No,
No.
that's
Okay.
it.
You can
I'm
find my stuff Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, either JW the Movie Guy or just the Movie Guy on all those platforms now. We're trying to take
Mhm.
over the movie guy realm, and I'm the only movie guy there is, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, moving on. It's
As
a
far as I'm
particular
concerned,
moniker. It's a particular moniker. You're like a film classicist, so you don't like movie guy is like some guy that buys popcorn, a schlub that goes to see everything. Anyway, what else am I going to say? So I will say, one thing about this show that we do, Generation Movie, not Generation Y, not Generation X. We don't get into all the fighting about boomers and whatnot. It's Generation Movie. Do you love movies? Come watch us every Wednesday. We'll be back next Wednesday, and I I think we're going to lighten it up next Wednesday. I've decided
oh,
we
it's
should
this
lighten it.
is a this is a movie that treats its female characters very respectfully and very honestly and very truthfully. And it's
Boom.
Fast and High.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High. You cannot go wrong. Amy
No.
Heckerling's 1982 classic. It
Mhm.
holds up remarkably well. It has, and I will say that Rich knows this, it has the single most rewound scene in the history of
Yeah.
VHS.
And what's funny is though, and we'll get into that, if you're rewinding it for certain reasons, you are the butt of the joke of that scene.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And I actually think there are filthier scenes in the movie. That's not necessarily a filthy scene. Jennifer
No.
Jason Leigh, who we talked about earlier as the tease, she is very naked through much of that movie. So, but it does treat its female characters and takes on really tough issues, but it's super funny. Also has amazing performances from Sean Penn and Judge Reinhold and
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer Jason Leigh and Phoebe Cates, and the list just goes on and on and on. And
Nick
the sheer
Cage.
volume of Nick Cage when he was just Nick Coppola, and Eric Stoltz is in it. There's so many people are in this movie.
Yeah, this is a
It's
fantastic film.
It's a great film. We're going to go into that very deep next Wednesday. Thank you for
Mm-hmm.
joining us tonight. We appreciate all you've done. We got two more comments before we get out of here. Spicoli, yes. Sean Penn, I don't think he steals a movie. The person that steals the movie is Mr. Hand. Mr. Hand steals the movie. A great performance, and one of the great teacher performances that doesn't get nearly the amount of justice it deserves, because it's understated and how great it is. Ray Walston, who's of course my favorite Martian and a bunch of other things, fantastic in the role as Mr. Hand. But okay, we'll talk about it more next week. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night. We appreciate all you do. We'll see you next week. Lots of stuff going on. Film Buff Online.
Have a great weekend.
Loud and Nerdy on Facebook and all those other places. And have a great day. Stay out of trouble. Bye.